Hello and welcome today. First off, I hope you, your loved ones, and your family are all safe and healthy. My name is Pat Gibbons. I lead programming efforts for the Indianapolis chapter of Conscious Capitalism, where we help Indianapolis companies discover, embrace, and embed the principles of conscious capitalism. Now, interestingly, today we're going way beyond Indianapolis. I was looking at the registration list right before our event and noticed that there are 17 different states, provinces, or countries represented, which is great. You may be joining from Cincinnati. We invited the Cincinnati chapter to join us today, or you may have just found it online. That's the great thing about virtual events is the word gets out there, and we're glad to have everyone here today. I want to kick off today talking about how we are starting a new series. And the series is called the Heart of Business Virtual Series. It is kind of got an interesting approach to what we're going through today. So if you look at 2020, I think it's kind of an understatement to say that it has been unexpected. It has been filled with anxiety, uncertainty, all of those things. So we want to take a little bit of a different perspective, and that perspective is healing. So as we think about all the things that are going on and how, looking into 2021, we may be tempted to look at all the negative things or look at just trying to get through this year so we can move on to the next year because it must be better. But we're going to suggest that we begin that process now, and we begin it with healing for us and for our organizations. Because I'm confident that we will all look back, and in many ways, while we'll recognize those challenges, we may also recognize the ways that we improved, the ways that we may have found some new skills. We may have found some new things about ourselves or our business that have made us better. So let's try to be sensitive to that now. So the series will start today talking about the healing organization. Raj Sisodia is here with us. On September 11th, we'll have a session on unconscious bias in the workplace, something very relevant for today. October 9th, we'll be joined by Safwan Shah. He's an author and a CEO of a really interesting company that is actually featured in the book, Healing Organization. On November 6th, we'll have a community panel discussion on equity, diversity, and inclusion. The main question we'll be asking is, are we making progress? Has anything changed? And then on December 4th, we're still finalizing some details, but we want to do something engaging and fun, something that really sets the tone for where we want to go in 2021. Now, the other thing you'll see on the screen is that after today's session, we're starting a book chat. And we're going to, of course, talk about the Healing Organization, which you'll hear more about today. It's conveniently kind of broken into 3 sections. And so we'll break that out over 3 lunch hours, and we'll just have open discussion, loosely facilitated, just to talk about what we've learned from the book and what we can incorporate into our organizations. And then finally, at the bottom of the screen, I just want to thank our Conscious Capitalism champions. These are companies that have financially supported conscious capitalism. It's the way we do what we do. So with that, if you have questions or things along the way, I encourage you to use the chat feature. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague on the leadership team, Nathan Bobe. He's going to introduce our guest speaker. Nathan.
Thanks, Pat. And thanks everybody for being here. Shout outs to people all across the country, from Wisconsin to Florida, New York to California. Hope you made it here safely to Indianapolis. I want to welcome returning guest Raj Sisodia, co-writer of Conscious Capitalism book from 2013, co-founder of the Conscious Capitalism Inc. organization. And one of the questions that we get constantly with Conscious Capitalism is, okay, I get it. Now, how do I do it? Raj went and co-wrote the Conscious Capitalism Field Guide. He is also a professor at Babson College in Boston. And his recent book is called The Healing Organization, which he's going to talk about a little bit today. his list of accomplishments are too long for me to list. And then, as I said, he's a returning guest. He was our keynote speaker at the Indianapolis chapter launch in October of 2017 at Delta Faucet Company. So Raj, welcome back to Indianapolis virtually.
Thank you, Nathan. Great to be with you, and great to have everybody join today for this conversation about the idea of business as healing, which seems a little radical to a lot of people, but I think we're recognizing the need for healing in the world, and business has a great role that we can play on that. So again, welcome everybody. I'm going to talk for about 35 minutes or so at most. Just give you a flavor of the book. I'm not going to be able to touch all aspects of it, but I'll give you the basic framing and then some of the stories. There are about 25 stories in the book, which are really inspiring. And these are about companies that are healing in different ways, all kinds of dimensions of life and of society. So, and then we'll have a conversation about it. So let me just share my screen. Okay, actually, let me just change a setting here. There's a setting in PowerPoint now where it does an automatic closed captioning. And I was speaking to an audience in Mexico yesterday, and they needed Spanish subtitles, but I don't think we need that today, so I'll just remove that for now. It's an amazing feature, actually. It'll subtitle in many, many different languages. So the title I'm using is Healing Our World, and the role of business in that. I think we all see the need for healing, obviously. I mean, this book came out before the pandemic, but since then, the need for healing at every level, in every way, has only accelerated, as we all see. I think you already heard about my background. I did want to share a little bit of my journey for those who might be new to this. I've been a business professor for 35 years now, but for the first 20, I was really, I would say, kind of a market warrior. I was kind of stuck in the old paradigm, or at least I was trying to be a good representative of the story that business is about profits and shareholders primarily, and that everybody else is a means to that end. And it was kind of a dehumanized story. There was not a lot of room for caring, and there was no higher purpose to it. It didn't really inspire, certainly did not inspire me very much. But that's what I was doing. And then I kind of found my way, or was guided somehow into this path of thinking about business in a different way and discovering a different paradigm of business. And that resulted, work started in 2005, and the book came out in 2007 after going through, by the way, 12 iterations, different titles and different framings. And we had a tough time getting publishers to embrace that book, but ultimately it turned into a rather powerful message, which is that these are companies that are loved by everybody. And what is in common to these companies are what we today describe as the pillars of conscious capitalism: the higher purpose, truly caring for all of their stakeholders, having leaders who care about people and purpose and not just about profit and their own ego and power, and cultures that are rooted in trust and authenticity and caring rather than fear and stress. And then, of course, we found that these businesses outperformed the market 9-1 over a 10-year period. So that became a story of, wow, how is that even possible? And it sounds too good to be true, but it is. Business is the ultimate value creation engine in the world. And if we think about it in the right way, the limits to value creation are far greater than we realize. And not just financial, but 8 other kinds of wealth that businesses can create. So the result of that book was a meeting with John Mackey of Whole Foods, which was one of the companies featured in that book. And then we discovered a shared passion. I had a mind map for what I call the Institute for New Capitalism, which I shared with John at our first dinner. And he said, that's my vision too, but I like the phrase conscious capitalism. So then we started, the book came out in 2007, and then we started the conscious capitalism movement in 2008. And it's grown quite a lot since then. And this book came out in 2013, the conscious capitalism book. And then I had a book around the idea of integrating more of the feminine energy into the world of business and leadership, where it's been lacking. It's not just about having more women, but actually even men being connected to that side of our being, right? All of us have both of these yin and yang kind of energies, and one of those has been suppressed to our great harm. it has caused a lot of suffering when we left that part of our humanity out. And so that's what that book was about. And then a book called Everybody Matters, which was about applying these ideas in the industrial heartland, small companies, manufacturing, blue collar workers kind of context. And this idea ultimately of caring for your people like family as being the really powerful benefit of that. And then the field guide, and then of course this book. So it's been kind of a 15-year odyssey for me now. And one of the realizations that I had 2 years ago when I turned 60 and I was starting to work on this book was a coach who told me when she heard the story of my life and how I had shifted and the culture I came from and how patriarchal and feudal and misogynistic it was in many ways. She said, "You realize that you have been honoring your mother with your work the last 15 years, starting with forms of endearment." And I had not realized that. And that was really a clarifying thing for me. And one of the things that that experience of writing this book did was actually send me on my own healing journey. And I took several months off at the urging of 3 of my women friends who said, you know, you're just rushing from project to project. If you're going to write about healing, you better focus on your own healing and be prepared to write this book. Otherwise, it won't be a meaningful book. And, you know, we always thought of this as a kind of sacred undertaking to write about healing because there is so much suffering in the world. And so I did. I took 5 months off and I had all kinds of experiences, silent retreat and going to the Himalayas, going to the Amazon rainforest and many things like that. And the net result of all of that is that I'm actually now working on another book coming out of that, which is a very personal, part memoir, part manual of what I have learned. I'm calling it Awakening to Purpose, Inner Peace and Healing. So that's what I'm working on now. If I had to articulate my purpose, which has become more clear to me over time, it's to bring heart, healing, and soul to business and leadership so we can build a better world for all. It's the absence of those things that has caused the world of business to be kind of a unidimensional thing. We've created financial wealth, we've created goods and services, but at the same time, you know, there have been a lot of negative fallouts from that for the environment, for people's psychological well-being, and many other dimensions that we will talk about. Right? So we need to restore that wholeness, you know, bring in these other aspects of what it means to be human into business. Of course, we're all dealing with this crisis and multiple crises, really. The economic crisis that came because of this, and now the social unrest that exists not only in the US, but in other places. You know, so there's a lot of turmoil and ferment out there. And I think what these multiple crises, and especially the pandemic, is showing us that a lot of what we believe is wrong. We need to go back and re-examine all our assumptions. You know, this is a time for rethinking. We don't want to create a new normal that is not the old normal. We need to rethink the role of business in society and how do we serve, how do we take care of people, how do we recover, how do we prevent these kinds of problems from happening in the future. But to me, the greatest reminder is that fundamentally we are here as human beings. We are born here to evolve our souls and to take care of each other. That's the deepest source of fulfillment for human beings. And business is a way we can do that at scale. In our normal lives, you can only take care of a limited number of people. You start a company, you can impact hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people in a positive way. So we think about business fundamentally as a way to scale caring. And that's a different energy than saying business is a way for me to make as much money as I can by, in a way, using other people to serve my goals. That's a different energy. Now, if I think about the times we are in, and not just the post-pandemic time, but actually just zoom out a little bit and just think about, you know, the early part of the 21st century and this point period in human history, I'm reminded of Dickens and A Tale of Two Cities, because he talks about it was the best of times and the worst of times. If you think about it, this is the best time to be born a human being. Your prospects are never better than what they are now, you know, in terms of economic well-being or having a longer life and being able to have a meaningful life and being educated and, you know, all the things, extraordinary technologies that we have access to. There's no better time to be born a human being in human history, and yet it's also one of the worst times. We've never faced, as a species, the kind of existential threats that we face today, whether it's climate change or species extinction or all the other things that have been happening. You know, that's unlike anything we've ever faced before. It's the age of wisdom and simultaneously the age of foolishness. It's the season of light and darkness, and you can see all of those things, right? And the question is, which direction are we going to take going forward? Are we going to continue to make it the best of times and then address those gaps in that? Or are we going to heedlessly go down the same path we've been on for the last 100, 200 years? If so, then we truly will end up in a dark place because we simply cannot sustain life on this planet in that path. And I think if we change the way we think about business, that would have a lot to do with it. Think about the paradox of life. Life is of course beautiful and filled with joy. It's an extraordinary gift that we have. A life lived in freedom. There's no greater gift than that. And yet we also know that life is also tragic and filled with suffering. Something like 17,000 children die every day, and this is pre-pandemic, right? From preventable causes like malaria and diarrhea and so forth. There's just a lot of suffering still in the world, despite all the progress that we have made. And we have made a lot of progress. Steven Pinker wrote a book called The Better Angels of Our Nature. The fact is that prosperity has risen and physical violence is down. We are living in the most peaceful time in human history. Fewer people are being killed by wars and murderers and terrorists than ever before, by orders of magnitude, 90-95% below historic norms, right? And so all of that is great news. But the fact is that we also have psychic suffering rising rapidly, and it's much higher than it's ever been. Depression, drug addiction, even suicides, anxiety, all of those things rising at significant levels, especially in developed countries, especially in the US. Right? And of course, planetary suffering is on the rise. We've done very little to address that. And so there's a lot of suffering out there in the world, despite capitalism has done so much for us in the last 200 years, acknowledging all of that, and yet suffering exists and pretty on a broad scale. So if you think about what has happened after just the last 100 years, this planet has been around, I think, for 4.7 billion years. And then we look at what has happened in the last 100 years to this planet and to the life on it. It's rather sobering. So 80% of the natural forests are gone, the old growth forests. Many of them are replaced with some fast growing eucalyptus trees or whatever, but it's not the same thing. We are losing a tremendous amount of biodiversity and life enhancing potential as a result of that. 30% of the arable land is no longer usable, partly because of deforestation, desertification, and so forth. In the last 100 years, 90% of the mammals in the wild are gone. Partly loss of habitat, poaching, hunting, etc. 95% of the large fish in the ocean are depleted. Where we do have more animals, of course, is in factory farms. We have 75 billion animals are killed every single year. Think about that, 10 animals per each human being. And another 100 billion fish are killed every year after living in so-called factory farms. And these are unnatural and I would say tortured lives for the pigs and the cows and the chickens and so forth, right? And where they are bred, to have certain kinds of qualities, and they are stuffed with antibiotics and so on and so forth. And of course, another trillion wild fish every year. There's a lot of suffering there, silent suffering. We never see this, right? We see the packaged products that show up in the supermarket, but we don't see the silent screams, if you will. A lot of suffering, and that suffering all adds up. It accumulates, in our environment in some fashion. We are living through the 5th mass extinction in human history, and the first one that is largely a result of human activity. An estimated 100 species a day go extinct, and in 50 years, half of the species, we're talking about the what do they call it, the insectopocalypse, or the bees are disappearing, and there's lots of things happening, and it's all an interconnected, interdependent system, and we don't know how it's going to impact. We do know it to some extent, but it's really pretty stark. And then if you look at the impact on our bodies, the toxic burden on human society, the average newborn baby has 187 known carcinogens in their cord blood. Cancer rates, it used to be about 25% during the Reagan administration, and by the time of the Obama administration, estimated 44% of Americans are expected to get cancer in their lifetime. A disease that was relatively rare 100 years ago is now going to affect 50% of men and about 35% of women in their lifetime. Right? And we have diabetes, and we have many other chronic diseases that are rapidly rising around the world as a result of all the toxicity. You can see that pollution kills 9 million people every year, 15 times more than all these other things combined. And it has an economic cost in addition to that of 4.7 trillion a year. Right? So again, these are all the consequences of how we have created that wealth and how we have operated as businesses and how we have lived our lives. We have caused tremendous, in some ways, irreversible damage and suffering. And so I believe that the need for healing is paramount. There is so much suffering in so many different dimensions that we need to heal ourselves. All of us, every single one of us on this call needs to heal in some way. We are all carrying some level of trauma. You know, PTSD is not restricted to returning war veterans. Every one of us, life is traumatic enough. Every one of us just growing up experiences trauma. And most of us never actually address that or heal from that. And as a result, then we project that, manifest that suffering into the world and onto others whose lives we touch. Our families certainly need healing. Our communities need healing. Our companies need healing. We'll talk a lot more about that. And our countries. As we all know, we've never been more divided as a country, and that's true in many countries right now. In India and Brazil, and in the UK, and Mexico, and many, many others. There's tremendous division that exists, political and otherwise. We need to heal our planet and its ability to sustain life. That's probably the most existential need, immediate, that we have in front of us. And we need to heal the past, in the present and the future. Until we heal the past, we really cannot heal in the present. You know, this is something that, you know, if you look at what South Africa did after the end of apartheid with Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu and others, that they really went through a truth and reconciliation process to heal from the wounds of a couple of centuries of apartheid and to acknowledge the suffering that had been created and foisted on people and to seek forgiveness for it. And move on from there. If they hadn't done that, they would have had a society ripped apart with revenge-fueled violence. And I think Germany has done that to a large degree with the legacy of the Holocaust. And I don't think we've done that adequately. And hence, we still see these eruptions 401 years after the advent of slavery, where we still see these eruptions happening and this unprocessed pain, an unacknowledged hurt that exists, right? So we have to, in the present moment, we have the power to heal the past. And therefore we can heal the present and set ourselves up for healing in the future. But if we ignore the past and say, that's the past, that doesn't matter. It's like saying history doesn't matter. Well, it does matter. It's still with us in some ways. So I've come to believe that we all need to be healers now. It doesn't matter what our chosen profession is. You could be a lawyer, a doctor, engineer, or a business professor, or a CEO. You, at some level, can think of yourself as a healer because you can actually impact people and help them reduce their suffering, bring more joy, and promote healthy growth, which is what I call healing. So Dalai Lama said our prime purpose in this life is to help others. And if we can't help them, at least don't hurt them. And unfortunately, we have actually been hurting each other a lot. Not consciously in most cases. Right? We are doing it inadvertently without even realizing it. Most CEOs, when they first hear this idea, say, what do you mean I'm causing hurting? You know, we're giving people jobs and we're providing goods and services. We're fulfilling some essential functions. I said, yes, but do you actually know the lived experience of people whose lives are impacted by your business and your company? And how much, what they're struggling with and how much we're adding to their burdens. Because if you don't consciously choose to be part of the healing, you will be part of the hurting. You will inadvertently cause a lot of suffering in your wake. You know, our friend Kip Tindall talks about the power of the wake. It's like a boat has this wake behind it. We don't look behind to see what impact we're having. But most of us, we all have a bigger wake than we realize. And it can be a positive wake, or if you don't think about it, it's probably a negative wake. We're having a negative impact. So if we are in fact causing a lot of suffering or contributing to the suffering in the world, then how do we change it? As James Baldwin said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. So we need to squarely look at what has been the impact of the way we have operated and what kind of suffering has resulted, and therefore we can learn and start to think about how we can do something about it. One indicator of suffering at work is the fact that heart attacks are 20% higher on Mondays. 4 a.m. on Monday morning is the peak of heart attacks. There are multiple studies that show roughly this level of impact. Our work is literally killing us. There is a tremendous amount of stress and fear connected to work for many, many people. Jeffrey Pfeffer had a book last year that documented the extent of suffering and the impact of this. And the estimate is 120,000 Americans die every year from stress connected to work. It's not the work itself, right? We have fewer people dying on work-related accidents and so forth, but it's the way we lead, manage, and organize that is causing all of this stress and death. The Chinese and Japanese have both had to invent new words to define this idea of death from overwork. It's called gualaozi, I think, in Chinese. The estimate is 600,000 Chinese die every year from overwork. Think about that. The next time you buy a product that says made in China, think about the human cost of making that product. We don't anywhere capture the shortened lives, the stressed out lives, the impact on the children of those people who work, right? All of that, the human cost of doing business may be the largest cost, really, of everything else. It doesn't show up on a balance sheet or income statements, right? It is just a cost we incur, and it's a huge cost. And we don't have to incur it. That's the sad irony. Another sad irony is that even our healing professions have been made places of suffering by the way we run our organizations. So, you become a doctor, you go to school for endless years, you get into debt, heavy debt, and because you're doing work that is noble and is aligned with your calling to be a force for healing in the world, and then you go to work in our healthcare system and you find that drug addictions and depression and suicides are much higher for doctors, nurses, and veterinarians. Doctors kill themselves at twice the overall average rate. Our work is literally killing us. Even noble work like this is being made into a place of suffering because of the way we run our hospitals, right? So this is a universal problem across the spectrum, not just businesses, but all organizations. The way we work isn't working. The way we lead, manage, and organize is not working. Doesn't have to be that way. I believe that if you do it right, business can actually have the opposite effect. It can alleviate suffering and elevate joy and promote healthy growth. You can leave at the end of the day better off. So this is not about healing businesses. This is not about saying we need to invest in more businesses that are, yoga studios and massage places and stuff like that. No. Natural food stores. No, this is saying any business can be a healing business. Think about your business as a form of healing. When you meet somebody's real needs and you do it in a loving, caring way, you're going to heal them. When you simply use them to make money for yourself, you're going to probably hurt them. So think about whatever business you're in as a force for healing, defined broadly as alleviating suffering and elevating joy. So business can be, in fact, a place of healing for those who work there. So you can leave at the end of the day, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and socially stronger than when you came in. You're not depleted. You're actually restored and strengthened by the experience you have at work. And business can be a source of healing for those we serve, our customers, our communities. It can make their lives better. It can improve their health and well-being. And business can be a force for healing in society. Business can show how people who are very different, ethnic, religious, political, whatever it might be, come together with shared purpose, shared values to do something extraordinary through this entity we call a business. We can show how we work together. We can be a force for healing in society. So the first part of the book is how did we get here? How did we cause all this suffering? And I haven't gotten into a lot of those details here. The second part of the book is about 25 stories of companies that are, in fact, forces, places, sources, and forces for healing in the world, and illustrating different dimensions of that. So one of them I like to start with is the parable of the pothole, because this illustrates a relatively universal idea. If you think about most businesses, and I come from India where there's a caste system, right? So there's different categories of people and you're born into that and your life is very different. It's one of the worst things about Indian society. But if you look at most companies, they also have a kind of caste system. And the general one is that you've got a small percentage of people, typically 10 to 15%, who are the college educated, professional, full-time, jobs, so the managers, executives, and leaders of the company. And then you have the 85% of the people who are mostly hourly paid, without benefits, mostly not college educated, part-time and full-time mix, very few benefits, no development opportunities, low paid. They actually do the work. They're the front line, right? They're actually manufacturing the products, or they're answering the phones or doing whatever, the actual work. And so this is about a company called Apple Tree Answers, which is the second largest call center company in the country, which grew through acquisition and roll up and became a sizable company. And then the CEO was looking at some of the data around employee engagement and employee turnover. And overall, the numbers were mediocre, but then he broke it down by the full-time professionals versus the part-time and full-time, the hourly workers versus the salaried workers. And he found a starkly different picture. So the full-time salaried people, they had a relatively high level of engagement in the 60s and a relatively low level of turnover in the teens. But when the hourly workers, the engagement was in the teens and the turnover was 118% a year. In other words, they were leaving after 10 months on average, voluntarily. And he said, wow, that's not a good way to run a business. Why are people leaving so frequently? And he was going to an industry conference hoping to learn something about that. And he mentioned it to somebody and they said, oh, the industry average is 158%. So you're doing something right. You should be speaking here and telling us how you have only 118%. He said, well, that's not acceptable. So he came back and he started talking to people and just asking them, tell me how we can make your life better. And so, what is it that's causing people to leave? And when he said, we get backaches all the time. The chairs are terrible, right? Can you, so he said, oh, of course, we're going to change the chairs and make sure you get ergonomic chairs. And after that, he started asking people, tell us something we can do every day. Give us ideas for how we can improve your experience at work. So they started to make a lot of changes. That made a difference. But ultimately, he realized that, it was the financial side. That 50% of Americans have less than $400 in the bank, and they could not raise $2,000 if they needed to in 30 days. That 100 million Americans live paycheck to paycheck. So he realized that for people, who are working these hourly jobs, a pothole, something that happens in their life, can completely derail their life. Your car breaks down, your heating system breaks down, your kid gets sick and you don't have adequate insurance. Suddenly, you could lose everything because you have no buffer between you and ruin. Right? So the story that we use is that imagine that your chief financial officer of the company is driving into work in her Mercedes and she hits this pothole and the rim gets damaged and the tire blows out and she pulls over and she calls AAA and they come and they tow the car to the Mercedes dealer and then she gets a ride to the office and shows up an hour late and everybody's saying, oh my God, are you okay? That must have been so scary. And they're bringing her coffee and they're very caring towards her. And it was a non-event in her life. Later that afternoon, the car gets delivered back to the office. It's repaired, it's cleaned, it's washed, and insurance covered most of all this. So it's a non-event, and yet we are caring towards her. And he said, now imagine one of our hourly workers is driving that same road in her 16-year-old Toyota Tercel and blows her tire and damages the rim. And she doesn't have AAA, so she can't, because she can't afford that. So she has to call around to get a tow company to remove the car. And then she has to call a friend to get a ride to the workplace because she can't afford to pay $40 for a taxi. And she gets in 3 hours late and she's told that the supervisor is waiting for you and he's really mad. And she goes in and he reprimands her and he tells her, well, it's a negative mark against your record and you get 2 more of these and you will be fired. Don't let this happen again. And then at the end of that, he tells her, now go and answer the phones and be nice to our customers. Now this woman's life is falling apart. She has $160 in the bank. She doesn't know how she's going to repair her car. She doesn't know how she's going to get to work or drop her kids off tomorrow at daycare. And we kick her when she's down. There's no empathy for her. And she's expected then to serve our customers. And he said, I want to address this problem. So they created a program. They call it Dream On. And they said, we want to help you with life's potholes. We know that life is challenging. And please let us know what we can do. So apply here and we'll try to help as many people as we can. And they put that out there and for 10 days, nothing happened. I said, wow, we know that people need help. How come nobody's writing? Well, the fact is people are stoic and people are heroic, They walk around with all these burdens and they just show up and do their job despite all the things that they're dealing with. Finally, after 10 days, they hear from a woman who says, I am so sorry. I need help. So my ex-husband stopped paying alimony 2 weeks ago and a week ago we got evicted. from our apartment. And my two kids and I have been living in the car now for a week. And I just can't do this to them anymore. I need help. I'm so sorry. Now, John Ratcliffe reads this, and all he says, all I felt was a deep sense of shame. He had tears in his eyes. He said, what kind of a leader am I? What kind of a company am I running? One of our full-time employees who's a mother is homeless for a week, and she can't even tell us. And of course, they got her into a hotel that night, and they helped her get into an apartment within a week, and they helped her with the first month, last month, and all those things, which is very difficult for many people to overcome those hurdles. And then they said to her, we can keep this quiet. We don't have to tell anybody. And she said, nobody has ever done anything this nice for me in my entire life. I'm going to tell everybody I know. And the word got out, and of course the floodgates opened, and so many other stories came pouring out, and other people were homeless and dealing with all kinds of challenges in their life. And they addressed them all one by one and helped them all. And fast forward 2 years later, the employee turnover went down to 16% in this company from 118%. And you can imagine the business consequences of that. How much better the business functions when you have a 16% turnover, right? But that's not why they did it. They did it because it was a caring and right thing to do at a human level. But the business benefits always come from that. And this, as I said, is a universal story. Every company has this kind of a caste system, but we ignore those people, and they have no real opportunities for growth, and we have no helping hand for them. Another story we have in the book is called, I call it Serving and Uplifting the Innocent. It's a company in India called Jaipur Rugs. And this is N.K. Chaudhary, who started this company, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago. And, he said, these hand-woven carpets are made by this particular caste in India. And this is the weaver caste. And they're born into it. And it's mostly women, because you need manual dexterity. Women are better at that. And these are hereditary skills that they learn, right? And they make these beautiful carpets. But these women are considered untouchable. This caste is considered one of the lower castes. And therefore, imagine you're born a girl into an untouchable family in India. That's about as low as you can get in terms of, your prospects in life. Because you will be fed last as a girl, probably undernourished. You will be educated last, if at all. Your brothers will get educated, you probably won't. So you end up being illiterate. And then you get married off at an early age to another weaver family. And then you have to cook and clean and make carpets and earn money for that family. And you're probably abused by your in-laws, and you're abused by your husband, who's probably an alcoholic. And you're abused by the carpet contractors who give you these jobs, but then they don't end up paying you on time, or they don't pay you what they promised you. And they physically and verbally and maybe sexually abuse these women. He said their lives are hellish. And these women are the innocents. They have never harmed anybody in their life. All they've done is serve other people. He said, I want to serve them. I want to make their life better. And I want to preserve this ancient art form as well. So he created a company where people are treated with respect and dignity. They are paid much better. They're paid on time. There's a foundation that educates them, gives them reading, writing, and basic accounting skills, and helps them educate their children as well. There are 40,000 women now. This is on the right, a woman named Shanti I interviewed, and she has 6 children. And she almost starved to death before she discovered this company because of all those conditions I described. And now she's been with this company for about 10 or 12 years, and she's got 20 women working with her, and they're all laughing and joyful. And, one daughter has graduated college, one is in college, 2 are in high school. The youngest boy is in 7th grade. These 6 kids are going to graduate college now from coming from an illiterate mother. Multi-generations of this family have been transformed because of Jaipur Rugs. Multiply that by 40,000 women across India. And I asked her, how do you feel about Mr. Chaudhary? And she started crying. She said, I don't have words. She said, he's more than my mother and my father. To me, he's God, because he gave me life. Before this, I didn't have a life, and now I have a life. It's extraordinary, the impact. These are for-profit businesses I'm talking about, not charities, right? This is the power of business to heal. Challenging industry norm. This is a simple one. Every industry has certain normal practices that we don't question. If you're consulting, basically it means you're going to be gone Monday to Friday at a client site. That's just how consulting works. And when you start out, it's exciting and you're traveling and staying in nice hotels and accumulating miles. But then you get married and you have a child, and suddenly, oh my God, this feels rather hollow, right? And my kids are going to grow up without me because going to be gone for most of the time. So these three consultants at Accenture saw that reality on the wall, and they said, wow, we don't want that for ourselves. So they quit and they started a company in Atlanta called JBN, which is a local consulting company. They said, we're going to do strategy consulting, but only for local companies. And there are plenty of big companies in Atlanta. And you don't have to travel for work. And you can be there because they said children are stakeholders too. And I think every company should adopt this. The children of our employees are stakeholders in our business. In fact, you can go as far as to say the family has to evaluate the company every year to see how we're doing from a family's perspective, right? So it's too high a price to pay to miss your own child's childhood because you're a consultant. You love consulting, and yet this is the price you have to pay. Nobody questions it because that's how it is. But you don't have to have it that way. Right? And this company is thriving. And they say, if we get more clients in Dallas, we'll open an office there. And then now they have offices in Dallas, Chicago, and Charlotte. And this little company in Atlanta has 3 of the top 20 consultants in the country working for them. Why? Because they care about the human side of it. They've become a place of healing for the children and for them. Another story here is confronting what I call social sadness. You know, there are things about our society, many extraordinary things, but many things that also kind of say, wow, this is one of the areas of deep suffering in our society. And one of those is the criminal justice system. You know, we have more people in prison by far than any other country in the world. We have the highest rate of incarceration by far in absolute numbers and as a percentage of the population, more than Korea and more than China, more than anywhere you want to name. And there are 70 million Americans today who have some kind of a criminal record now. Think about that. The same number that have a college degree have a criminal record of some kind because they got into trouble at some point in their life. And they've served their time and they've paid their dues, and yet they come back into society, and what happens? All doors are closed because there's a little box you have to check. Have you ever been convicted, etc.? And if you check that, then most companies will screen you out. So Bernie Glassman, who was a Zen master in Yonkers, New York, said, I want to help people who get a first chance. He said, there are people in our country who don't even get a first chance. Forget about a second chance. They're born into terrible circumstances, surrounded by drugs and violence, terrible schools, no way out and no way up. They get caught up in that system. And before you know it, they're trapped for life. Right? He said, I want to give them a first chance. Because we don't hire people to bake brownies. We bake brownies to hire people. He started a bakery because you can teach anybody how to do this work. And they practice what they call open hiring. If you need a job, you put your name on that list, and they hire the next person on that list. No interviews and no background checks. And they train them for 9 months, and then they place them in a job. And this is completely transforming lives. So this was Dion Drew who spoke at our conference, and he had tears in his eyes. He said, I was in jail 3 times. And every time I'd look for a job, and when I came out, I'd look for a job, and nobody would give me a job, and I'd end up back on the street corner to survive. And this time I found Greyston, and now he's a training supervisor. He makes $60,000 a year. He's got a little daughter. He's got an apartment. And he said, if it were not for Greyston, I would be dead or back in jail. So again, a life-changing impact that a business can have. So, you know, whether you create a healing organization or a hurting organization depends on the leader. Leaders set the tone. What's inside you, as we say, the macrocosm is a reflection of the microcosm. If you are not healed within, if you're carrying on, as they say, what hurt people, or we are all victims of victims, you will magnify, amplify your inner pain and inflict it on others. So as a leader, you have to work on yourself. You have to go on your own journey of healing. And I had to do that. You know, if you have time, we can talk about that. But it's really the most important thing we can do. And then as we come out of the situation we're in now and rebuild and reestablish things, we know that the new normal cannot be the old normal. We cannot do things the same way we did them in the past. We have seen the suffering. The suffering that was under the surface has now become so visible. We have seen how vulnerable we all are. Nothing really protects you, your education, your wealth, etc. A lot of those things don't protect you from the kind of human vulnerability that does exist. We've seen how connected we are, how dependent we are on each other. We have to carry that learning into the new normal. You know, it's funny that when I started writing this book, I went to a Chinese restaurant once and I got this actual fortune cookie. I'm not making this up, okay? This is the actual fortune cookie I got. It said there are many ways you can be hurtful, but only one way to heal, and that is through love. So we have to bring that. And I think that there are two things that they are hidden in the corporate closet for most companies. They're not allowed to talk about or show these things. What are they? One is unexpressed love. Human beings have a need to care, which is even more powerful a drive than our drive for self-interest. I believe that the most abundant and underutilized resource on this planet is human caring. We have an infinite capacity for love and care. Yet in our workplaces, that is not expected or even encouraged or allowed in some ways. We are expected to show up as market warriors, put on our mask and armor, go to battle, defeat the competitors, capture some market share, right? The workplace is kind of analogous to, like a military thing, right? Most of our business thoughts have come from the military, the way we think about business. But we have all this caring that's bottled up, locked away in the corporate closet. And then we have all this suffering. People, life is hard enough. And then we add our work burdens to it. If you could see a thought bubble over the head of everybody you encounter at work or even on the street, it would break your heart every day. People are carrying around enormous burdens. Somebody's mother just got Alzheimer's, somebody's child is addicted to opioids, somebody just got a cancer, whatever, there's so many things, right? There's all this silent suffering, and we're supposed to be stoic and, not be professional. If we can create a culture in which people can actually be vulnerable and express what's going on in their lives for real, and other people are able to express their love and care, we will launch a tidal wave of healing. And this has to be modeled at the top. Leaders have to show up as human beings, as vulnerable, be willing to ask for help, and show up in a loving, caring way for the suffering of others. And I think we can really create a very, very different world if we do that, where our workplaces will no longer feel as they do for many people like prisons, and they will actually become more like playgrounds, places of joy and fun and creativity and camaraderie and playfulness, and highly productive at the same time, right? We do extraordinary things when we're in that place. The book ends with what I call a healing oath. Doctors have to take an oath, the Hippocratic oath, because your life is in their hands. Well, as a leader, people's lives are in your hand as well. And I think all leaders should have to take some kind of an oath as well. So we have offered that at the end of the book in 3 short phrases. We start with the Latin primum non nocere, which means do no harm. I'll operate my business in a way that causes no harm to others or to planet Earth. Then malus eradicare, I'll root out evil. I will never enable or collude with abuse, exploitation. I'll stand up for fairness, truth, beauty, integrity, and basic goodness. And amor vincit omnia, love conquers all. I will operate from love and always measure success by the fulfillment, abundance, and joy I generate for all those whose lives I touch. If we can truly live into this, treat this as a sacred oath, I think that would dramatically transform our workplaces and our society. Thank you very much for listening. I'll stop here and open it up for comments or questions, or thoughts.
All right, thank you, Raj. We did get one question, and that was, what is one thing we can do as healers as we go back to our businesses, as we go back to work? If we made a shift in our attitude, what's one thing we could do?
Well, I mean, the book is full of those ideas, right? I mean, people literally, they say, Monday, here's a list of things I can implement right away. They're very practical and easy things to do. What is the one thing I can do? Show up as a full human, show up as, express, vulnerability, talk about what's really going on in your life. Next time you open a meeting, don't just say, how are you doing? Fine, let's move on. Share in a genuine way with each other. Because see, the leader models it. If you set a bar for disclosure and authenticity, if you get up to an 8 or a 9, everybody else will rise to a 7. If you're stuck at a 3, nobody will get above a 2. Okay? So you have to model it. You have to model the authenticity and vulnerability, and you also have to model genuine care. And then it starts the cascade from there. So I would say it starts there. Open your eyes and heart and look around. And you say, somebody, how are you doing? I'm doing fine. How are you really doing? right? And really listen, and empathetic listening deeply. You know, I get reminded of that show, An Undercover Boss, if you've seen that show, where the CEO puts on a disguise, elaborate disguise, and they then start to experience the front line of their own company and how the work is done. And the universal story of that is, oh my God, I have new respect for these people. I thought they're minimum wage, therefore the work must be easy. And it's much harder than what I do as a CEO, what they're doing. And they have respect for them, and they understand how hard they're trying and how diligent they're being, and all the life challenges that they're happening. They're getting evicted, all kinds of stuff is happening, right? And they develop empathy for that group of people they interact with. And at the end of the show is the big reveal, and they show, oh my God, that's the CEO all along. And then there's a big check for $25,000 for Molly, because Molly, I know you're dealing with this situation, so we're going to help you with that. And here's another thing for this person, because your mom is sick, right? So they will put bandages on those people, and then it's the end of it. They don't do anything to change the systemic causes of that suffering that they witnessed, right? I think we need to, as James Baldwin said, you know, once we face up to it, we will start to, you know, and Bernie Glassman said that the Buddhist principle here is we bear loving witness, right? Bearing witness to the suffering that exists. So he cared about homelessness. So what did he do? He took a group of people and they lived on the streets for 1 week next to the homeless people. And at the end of that week, he said, I know what I need to do. So bear witness to the suffering, and then loving action will naturally arise. You will know what your soul will tell you what you need to do. So I think that's what we have to open up. If you're the leader of that company, that's what you have to start modeling for people. But also the other part of it is you have to start looking at yourself too. You really cannot be a healer until you work on your own healing as well. So you have to go on that journey. And that's a whole different thing.
Okay, a few other questions. We'll see if we can fit one or two of these in. One refers to the Business Roundtable statement on the purpose of a corporation. For those that are not familiar with it, Business Roundtable used to have a statement on the definition of a corporation that was very shareholder focused, and it just in the last year has changed to something that's very stakeholder focused, very consistent with conscious capitalism belief. And the question is, do you feel like you've seen any positive movement in American business that may have been influenced by that?
Well, you know, it's hard to say because that statement came out in August.
Mm-hmm.
And then Davos came out with their Davos Declaration in December around stakeholder capitalism. So we did feel we were getting close to a tipping point where the dominant paradigm will become stakeholder purpose long-term rather than shareholder, quarterly results, etc. But then, of course, the pandemic hit, right? So that's created a whole different, unnatural kind of situation. I do feel that there are a lot of companies that have stepped up in a compelling way beyond what we would have expected. It was not the usual suspects just doing what we would have expected. A lot of companies showed up with deeper humanity and caring and collaboration and so forth than we would have expected. So I do think coming out of this, we have awakened compassion, caring, empathy at a deeper level in many companies, not all, and in leaders. We have discovered new ways of cooperating and collaborating across sectors, across companies. I think that will translate into fundamental changes going forward. Mm-hmm. And almost independent of what the Business Roundtable said, but that will also help. I think we're going to have to come back from this more resilient. After there's an earthquake, you don't rebuild in the same way. And there are a lot of companies that were very weak in their corporate structures, a lot of heavy debt. What did companies do in the last 10 years of a booming economy? They bought back their own shares. 93% of corporate profits have gone to share buybacks and dividends in the last 10 years. Some years it was more than 100% of profits went to that. So companies borrowed money in order to buy back their own shares, to raise their share price, to reward today's shareholders and executives and others holding stock options, while putting the future of the company in jeopardy. So they created these very weak balance sheets with lots of debt, so that if the interest rates rise or if there's a significant depression or downturn in the market, you are immediately on the edge of bankruptcy. Like all three of the major US airlines would have been bankrupt without a bailout. because they had massive debt and they used all their profits to buy back shares. And so we need to create resilience and strength in our balance sheet so we can actually survive even a larger. This is not the last pandemic, and this is a relatively mild one compared to what's possible, right? In terms of the mortality rate and the infection rate, there's some much more dangerous things that could happen. And in a way, this is kind of spring training for the real challenges, right? Bigger pandemics, climate change, which is the biggest pandemic of all, that we have to address using some of the sort of muscle memory we've built in this time. Right? We've learned how to do things. We've learned how to pivot. I was talking to Verizon. They had a 5-year plan for going to virtual work, and they've implemented that in 3 weeks. You know, there are companies that are doing things that are able to pivot at a rapid rate we never realized. And so a lot of innovation has happened as well.
Yeah, very good. Let me squeeze in one more question. We're almost at the top of the hour, but this one refers to CEOs and their responsibility to boards. So CEOs report to boards. Boards often operate kind of in the old way. Are there any things that we can do to support the CEOs in their challenge if they are trying to create healing organizations?
Yeah, it is a very real challenge because, as you said, boards are still lagging behind in some ways in terms of evolution of consciousness. Because you've got older, established people that typically make up boards. So 2 things. I think reforming boards is an important challenge going forward. Having them rethink the purpose. What is the definition of fiduciary responsibility? What is the governance over? I mean, there is a shift there. There's awareness about purpose. There's awareness about culture. I'm on a board. We talk about that, and that's already a conscious company. But we get all these things from the various firms that are putting out white papers and so forth. So I think reforming boards is an important one. I've spoken at the NACD a few times at their annual event, and there is receptivity there. But I think what leaders need to do is to make sure that the board is part of these conversations. Boards have to understand why these things matter. They have to, we have to expose them. We can't just be doing things on the culture and values and all of that and then just present the numbers to the board. They have to be part of that conversation. They have to be part of those learning journeys and, consciousness raising experiences and so forth. And then as we evolve the board, because CEOs do have a say in that, right? When there's a board vacancy, we make sure we bring in people with this consciousness. And a big part of that is diversity. Making sure we have women on the board and young people on the board and ethnic diversity, etc. That's where diversity is most lacking right now at the board level. So yeah, it is a challenge, but I know that you have to keep the board on board with your journey as a CEO, and that's part of. I've experienced that a couple of times where the board was not part of the conversation about becoming a conscious business, and at some point they pulled the rug and went in a whole different direction.
Yeah. Raj, I just want to thank you for today. It was a great session, very inspirational, lots of great information, great stories. I have read the book. I know that those are just 2 or 3 of the many stories that are in there that are just as inspirational, and it's just great examples of healing organizations. So thank you again. I encourage everybody, I do have one big favor to ask of everybody. We're always looking for your feedback, so you will receive an email. It's going to contain a lot of stuff, but the first thing on the list is an opportunity to fill out a survey that takes about 1 minute. And then you'll have the opportunity to sign up for 3 different things: the unconscious bias session, the session with Saffron Shaw, it's about time, and also the book chat. And so I look forward to all of those, and I hope all of you might be interested in those as well. Thanks again to our champions one more time, and one more time, Raj, thanks so much for all that you've done and what you brought today.
You're welcome, Patrick. And there's some questions, and I don't have another thing right now. I'm willing to stay if anybody wants to stay.
Great.
And chat a little more. I know Carolina asked about my own healing journey, and I'm happy to share that if you would like.
Great. For those that can stay, you're welcome to. I'm hosting the Zoom meeting, and I can stay. So
yeah. So let's just continue for a little bit.
Sounds good.
as I said, my journey, I was treating this like any other book project. I said, okay, I've got the interviews, I've got the research, I've got the framing, I've got everything. And I set aside the summer for multiple writing retreats, and I was ready to go. And then three different friends of mine who I really trust and admire, and they all happen to be women, they all said, Raj, you need to slow down. Uh, you're always running from project to project and from airport to airport. And you cannot write about healing until you actually think about your own healing. So one of them was Lynn Twist of the Pachamama Alliance, and then Nilima Bhatt, with whom I wrote the Shakti Leadership book. And she said, we're planning this trip to the Himalayas. And it happened to coincide with my 60th birthday. And it's going to be in the border of India and Tibet, with a very Buddhist kind of a region. And, there'll be a lot of healing and spiritual wisdom that you can learn. Because if you talk about suffering, the Buddhist tradition has more to offer on suffering than any other tradition does, right? So I said yes to that, and spent 8 days over there and had a wonderful experience and a lot of deep reflection about that wisdom. And then Lynn Twist called me and said, you were in my dream last night. You need to come to the Amazon rainforest with me. We're taking 17 people on the founder's journey. We're going to spend 10 days there and 5 days with these two different native indigenous peoples. And you're going to learn more about healing and our connection to nature than anything. I said, Lynn, I've got writing. He said, no, delay. So I delayed the book by 5 months. And I said yes to all of these things. And I went on that journey. And that was incredible. Being in that environment and then having all those shamanic healing, tobacco ceremonies and dream interpretations. And then one day they had an ayahuasca ceremony as well. And some of you may know what that is. It's this ancient ceremony that they do as a rite of passage, but also when they're dealing with anything significant or important, they will boil these two different things together from that occur naturally in the forest, and then they have this kind of consciousness altering experience where the shaman might take it too, and they will actually be with you on your journey and somehow share that with you, even though you're just lying down in separate locations. But anyway, that was offered as part of the potential experience. Then we did that, and I just had a profound experience where I said I came here to learn about healing and what I need to do for healing for myself, but also what the world of business needs for healing. And it was extraordinary. I mean, after I started to feel the effects of it, my first hour or so, I just cried. I was expressing grief that I had been bottled up for decades. I had not cried. People had died, all kinds of sad things had happened in life. And somehow I was never able to bring that. I was blocked up in some way, and I was able to bring all of that emotion. They say the ayahuasca really connects you to the mother energy and the grandmother energy, of the planet. And that's kind of, I heard a baby crying, and that just opened me up. And so that was part of it. And then I started seeing all these messages and sort of visions saying what the world of business needs to heal. And I have these 4 words floating in my, vision, even though my eyes were closed. But these 4 said, this is what you need. You need love, innocence, simplicity, and truth is what the world of business needs, and the world generally needs. Love, innocence, and that came as an acronym. That's the list. So here's the list, right? Love, innocence, simply. We've gotten away from love. In business, it's all about using each other and exploiting each other, right? It's a lot of fear-based carrots and sticks that we used to. Innocence. And that's actually a big theme of the book I'm writing is, we are all born innocent. And then we get corrupted, and then we lose our essential humanness, right? We lose our trusting nature, and we start figuring out how we can trick and abuse, use each other and win, and all of that, and that stays with us. But there's an innocence we can then come back to. We call it the innocence on the other side of wholeness, where you're not the naive and helpless baby innocent. You're actually the strong and knowing innocence with a core of steel. Right? You still have no ill will and no hidden agendas to anybody, and you're operating with that purity of intent. As I talked about N.K. Chaudhary with Jaipur rugs. He said, I wasn't innocent. I was always considered. People said, "Oh, you're such an innocent, simple soul. You will never make it in the world of business because people will eat you alive. It's a jungle out there." And he said, I'm going to show people that I can do business by staying true to my nature, right? And then that's shown up now in 40,000 women's lives being transformed, right? So love, innocence, simplicity, and truth. Simplicity, you know, basic, most important things in life are simple. But we have become mired in complexity. If you think about the economic crisis of 2008, it was because we created all these complex financial instruments, right? We're hiding behind that complexity. We need to get to what Oliver Wendell Holmes called the simplicity on the other side of complexity. Once you go through that complexity, you can then, once you truly master the domain, you see the simplicity again, everything falls into place. And then truth. What's our commitment to truth? I mean, I have a PhD in marketing, for God's sake, right? Where's the role of truth, right? If you think about it. But yet, that's the most important thing. So, I got those kinds of messages. I mean, I can go on, but I don't want to take too much time. I got one image, I'll share the last one from that journey. I got an image of a long line of people standing under the hot sun, waiting for a hug from this tiny little woman at the end of the line. Now, this is a real woman. She's called Amma, which means mother, and she's the hugging saint of India. And she travels all over the world. And all she does is she sits there and people line up 8-9 hours, thousands of people, and she gives them a deep hug and doesn't even say anything. She doesn't even speak much English. And people walk away in tears because they experience unconditional love in that hug. And people are starving for that. And the message I got was all these people in this line could be actually hugging each other. They don't need to go there and wait for that hug from that person. We have what we need to heal each other. You don't have to go somewhere else or go to somebody else, right? So we within human beings have the answers for ourselves and for each other. And we have to turn to that. Instead, we isolate ourselves and then go somewhere else to have that experience. So anyway, I had that, and then I had the silent retreat in upstate New York with Peter Senge and a bunch of other people. And I was like, I would strongly recommend that experience. I did it for 4 days. But there's no room for silence in our lives. We're constantly either in noise or we've got our devices. And I was just receiving downloads about the healing book, but also about what's going to become now the next book. I was just getting access to so much wisdom. It was coming to me and through me because I was in that place of silence and being fully present and therefore connected to source in a way. And then the last thing was the working with the coach, who then had the insight that I've been honoring my mother with my work, and then getting more connected to that and having a conversation with my mother and expressing that gratitude to her. And that was very healing at a personal level, but also got me to think about my own upbringing and my childhood and the extreme, polarities I experienced of extreme hypermasculine, misogynistic, feudal energy from my grandfather and my father and others, and then the pure unconditional love from the mother's side. And then kind of making sense of all of that and how that kind of formed me and shaped me to be able to write a book about the feminine, to be able to talk about some of these other things. So anyway, that's what that new book is about, which is kind of the path, 12 steps on the path to purpose, inner peace, and healing that I've discovered through my life experience, but also I've read about and learned about to share on my own journey, but also then, so the part memoir and part manual. Then the steps are things like know yourself, love yourself, be yourself, right? Choose the life that you've been given, express yourself in the world, choose gratitude and joy, etc., etc. There's a bunch of those steps. So anyway, thank you, Carolina, for asking. And that's the journey. It's a preview of the new book. Jennifer has a question. Can you share key considerations to approach love and Shakti at organizations? It's an interesting, you can create sort of within the island, within the part of the organization that you are, you can start to bring those values in because you're probably a leader at some level in the organization. But for the whole organization to evolve in that way, you really need the CEO to actually go through some kind of awakening or realization or life change, because otherwise it's very hard to change the overall corporate environment from the bottom up or from the middle out, But that doesn't mean you can't create an island of healing and caring in your own sphere of influence, at work as well as in your personal life. But ultimately, it does get to the leader. That's why a lot of the work we do is with leaders, because if you can awaken them or help them move in their journey, it has a massive multiplier effect in the world. Okay, I think that was probably it. Any other last questions or thoughts?
Anybody else? I think at this point, if you got a question, just unmute and say it.
B corporations are great. They are a fellow traveler with us. We're now part of this entity called Imperative 21, which came together under the Ford Foundation last year, around the time of the roundtable announcement. So we have B corporations, B team, conscious capitalism, inclusive capitalism, just capital, and CECP are the 6 entities that have come together to say we all share a vision of what we want the world of business to evolve towards. And we're all doing our own thing, which is good, but we also need to speak with a common voice to have a bigger impact. And so that's happening. And as I said, B team, B Corp is a great ally. We say every conscious business should become a B Corp if they can incorporate formally that way. And every B Corp that exists, whether they know it or not, is a conscious business because they are operating with this operating system in a way. So it's just a very powerful ally and friend of ours, that movement. Well, thank you all again. As I said, this book is a very meaningful book to me, The Healing Organization. So if you like it and if you read it and like it, please do post about it on Amazon, write your reviews, share the word in the world. This book is like a child that needs, help in the world. So we want to put it out there. Okay.
Right.
And,
Great. Thank you again, Raj.
thank you, guys. Take care, and thank you for what you do for the future and for spreading this movement.
Thanks, Raj.
Take care. All the best to you all. Stay healthy and safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you.